Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Ijoma Fab. So today I'll be showing you how to make this trendy sleeve on the screen. So to start with, we need to know that the sleeve comprises of two parts. We have the basic sleeve and also the puffy part. So we'll start off with the basic sleeve. So I have this fabric here which I want to use for the basic sleeve, and the length of this fabric is 19 3/4. This is almost 20 inches, so feel free to use whatever length you want to work with. So the next thing I'm going to do right now is to mark out the sleeve cap, which is 4 inches, and the elbow I'll be working with is 12.5 inches. Now I'm going to extend the marking. So please note, I'm marking on the wrong side of my fabric, and my fabric is also folded into two. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to mark my sleeve opening, and the sleeve opening I'm working with is 9 inches divided by 2 because the fabric is on fold. That will give me 4.5 inches. So I'll mark 4.5 inches here, plus I need 1 inch for seam allowance. And on the elbow round I'm working with is 12 inches. So divided by 2 will give me 6 inches plus 1 inch seam allowance. And here I'm going to mark 8 inches here plus 1 inch seam allowance. So the next thing to do is to connect the markings. Then from here I'm going to create the curve this way, and our sleeve is ready. So if you don't know how to draft a basic sleeve, I have a detailed video on my channel on how to draft a basic sleeve. So before I cut out, I want to explain something. If you're working with a non-lacy fabric, you need to fold your hemming allowance inward before you cut the sleeve out. If you're working with a lacy fabric that has an edge or a selvage, you don't need to fold it in. So you're just going to cut out directly. For this, I wouldn't be folding the hemming allowance. This is just for the tutorial. So I'm going to cut this out now. So the next thing now is to achieve the puffy part of the sleeve, which is the second part of the sleeve. So you also need to measure what you have here. I have 10 inches here. So the next thing I'm going to do is to set this aside and move over to the puff. So I'll be making use of this bridal satin for the puffy part. So the width of this fabric is 1.5 inches. Then you can determine the length you want to work with. So to achieve the puffy part, I'll be making use of a half flare, which is 180-degree flare. My fabric is already folded into two. Now I'll just go this way and fold in a triangular form, just like this. So this is our 180-degree flare. So the armhole I measured was 10 inches, and when I open up, it will give me 20 inches. So I'm going to divide the 20 inches by 4 because my fabric is folded into 4. So that will give me 5 inches. So at this point here, I'm going to mark 5 inches. Instead of marking 5 inches here, I'll mark 7 inches. I'll add 2 inches to it. So if you want to pleat or you want to gather, you add between 1.5 inches to 2 inches. So I'll make use of 7 inches here. So I'm going to mark 7 inches here. So the next thing now is to determine the length I want to work with. So before I do that, I'll have to remember that this is a 2-layer puff. So if you look at the picture very well, you will notice that the flare stops around the elbow area, and it has that puffy drop-like effect after the elbow. So because of that, I'll be adding about 8 to 9 inches to my length, to the actual elbow length. So the elbow length I'm working with is 12.5 inches, and 8 inches plus 12.5 inches will give me 20.5 inches. So I have my 20.5 inches here. So I'll keep going round and I'll mark 20.5 inches. So after marking, the next thing I'm going to do is to connect this way. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to cut the flare out. So I have my flare here and I have it turned to the right side of the fabric. Now I did this because I want to make some necessary markings. So remember, this is a double layer flare. Now I'm going to take the length of what I have here and divide it into two. So whatever I get, that's what I'm going to mark as half of this. So you're going to slightly do this on the right side of your fabric. So I have about 10 inches here. I'll be doing this all around slightly. So doing this will guide me to achieve the mid layer of the puff. So it will make it easier when sewing. So I'll continue doing like this to the other side, this side of the flare. So I'm done marking and this is how it looks like. So I had to mark this lightly all around. So I have this, if you can see, all around and behind. So this is going to guide me when I want to sew on the sleeve. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to pick up this folded part and I'm going to notch this part, which is going to serve as the midpoint. It's going to serve as a guide when I want to fix this lower part to the basic sleeve. So for the sleeve, I'll also do some markings like I did for the flare. First of all, I'm going to mark where I want the flare to stop. So it's going to stop at the elbow here, which is 12.5 inches. I'm going to extend this marking. And I'll do the same thing to the other side of the sleeve. So the next thing I'm going to do also is to mark where I want the second layer of the puff to start from. So since I already have 12.5 inches here, I'll just go ahead and divide what I have into two, which will be 6.25. So I'm going to extend this 6.25. So I have my markings completed, and when I open up, this is how it's going to be. So I have my lines here as a guideline. The next thing I'm going to do now is to take the flare. So remember, this is the right side of the sleeve, and I'm going to also take the right side of the flare. The bottom part which I notched is going to be on this crease line at this midpoint here. So you're going to fix it this way. So the next thing you're going to do is to pleat or gather this way, and you'll be doing the same thing to this end, this way too. So I'm going to pleat this and I'll show you how it looks like. So this is how it looks like after sewing. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to place this way. So I'm going to make sure that this midpoint, I have a crease line here which is going to serve as a guide for me, matches up with the midpoint on the sleeve here. I have a midpoint, a line here, a crease line. So I'm going to make sure that the line I created here, the marking I made, will match with this marking here. So at the midpoint, I'll just hold it down with a pin at the midpoint here. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to pick this up, making sure that the marking I have here will rhyme with this. So I'm going to place it this way, and I'll make sure that the line here aligns with the line on the sleeve. So I'll either pleat it or gather it up. I'll do the same thing to this other end. So after achieving this part, the next thing to do now is to pick up the flare, making sure that the notch part of the flare here and that of the sleeve, I'll make sure they match each other. Then the next thing I'm going to do now is to also gather up this part or pleat it up to fit into the sleeve. I'll be doing the same thing to this other end. So once I'm done, the next thing I'm going to do is to fold up this way and close up with my 1-inch seam allowance. So guys, this is the final product after sewing our sleeve. So you remember I added 8 inches extra to the original length. So this was the drop-like effect I was talking about, just to achieve something like this. So if you have more fabric to work with, you can add between 10 to 12 inches extra to the original length. So I hope this video was helpful to someone. Please like, share and subscribe.